Alright, so at this point there's two things that I want to cover. The first of these is how we actually assign objects to the different columns. We do that by using an attached property. Remember, we used attached properties earlier with canvas, canvas.top and canvas.left. Remember that an attached property is a property that gets defined by the panel for use on elements within the panel. Here we're going to use an attached property called grid.column to move something into the next column. So first of all, let me maximize the window again. And then let's scroll down a little bit, and we'll set the grid.column property on one of our ellipses. Now grid.column refers to the column definitions using a zero-based index. In other words, if you assign something to column 0, it will actually show up in the first column. And if you assign something to column 1, it will actually show up in the second column, and that's what happened here. The default value for grid.column is 0, and that's why by default everything was showing up in the first column. But if we assign something to column 1, like we just did, we can see that it shows up in the second column. It's also possible to specify that an item should span across more than one column. You can do this with another attached property called column span. By default, the value for this property is 1, and that's why everything shows up in just one column. But if we were to set this value to 2, for example, it would span across 2 columns. So watch what happens if I set the column span to 2 on our blue ellipse. So you can see how this is incredibly flexible for specifying how elements get placed into the various columns that you've defined. And if you combine that with the way that Grid takes advantage of horizontal and vertical alignment properties and also the way it uses margins, you can see that it's a really powerful panel. The thing that is still missing, of course, is our ability to customize the size of the columns themselves. Basically, column sizes come in 3 flavors. The default value, and the one that we're seeing right now, is a special value that we generally call a star. It's written using asterisks, and basically a value of star tells the column to take up one portion of the available space. So here we have 3 columns, and each one is taking up one portion. So the result is that each gets 1/3 of the available space. If we were to change one of these to have a value of 2 star, it would get 2 portions of the now 4 spaces that are available. Let me show you what I mean. If we scroll up to look at the definition of the first column, and then change the width property of this to be 2 star, and then hit F5 to refresh, you can see that that first column now gets half of the available space, and the remaining half is divided between the other 2 columns. That's 4 portions, because the first is 2 star and the other are 1 star each. In other words, the total number of stars gets normalized, and an appropriate portion gets assigned to each of the columns according to the relative number of stars. Now here's a trick. If you're coming from an environment where you're used to specifying these kinds of values using percentages, you can actually just replace the percentage sign for a star. Let me show you what I mean. We can replace the width of this one to be 0.5 stars, and then the width of the other 2 to be 0.25 stars. Alright, now if I hit F5 to refresh, you can see that the distribution stays exactly the same, but now we're using what looks like percentage values in order to divide up the distribution of the columns.